More importantly, Gus said, have you transferred that sword to my character yet? Heck no, Hank said, a little too loudly. Not yet. From the back of the line, Ms. Freckle hissed through her teeth. Not a peep, class, she snapped. You must listen to me. You all know it's my job to protect you. Gus rolled his eyes. Ms. Freckle was always saying that, like her students really needed protecting. Hank continued in his quietest whisper. I'll transfer the sword after you've fulfilled your part of the bargain, he said. No way, Gus said. Transfer it first. In fact, do it right now. Don't you trust me? Hank said. Not at all, Gus said. He smiled. Chapter 4. The Wrong Key. Fine, Hank said. He glanced over his shoulder at Ms. Freckle and then looked at Mr. Pommel at the front of the line. The group was still moving down a long, windowless hallway toward the back of the building. Hank pulled his phone from his pocket. He tapped the screen a couple of times as Gus looked over his shoulder. Gus really wanted a phone like that, but his parents wouldn't let him get anything fancy. His phone was just so they could find him, and he could find them in an emergency. No games, no videos, and definitely no apps to connect with Battle Knights. Gus watched Hank's fingers slide across the screen. It pulled the sword, a shimmering blue blade that sparkled under a gold and silver halo, from Hank's account to Gus's. There, Hank said. Happy? Gus smirked. I'll be happy when you hit save, he said. Oh, yeah, Hank said. His face went red. I forgot. He tapped the little save button and then slipped his phone back into his pocket. At the same instant, Mr. Pommel stopped. Then the class stopped behind him. Mr. Pommel cleared his throat. This, he said in a loud and important voice, is the meeting hall. It is empty now, which is why we can go in. He turned around and put his hand on the knob. He wiggled the knob. It didn't turn. The door was locked. Mr. Pommel smiled. He said, stammering a bit. Let's see. He dug in his pocket. Finally, with some jangling and jiggling, he pulled out his key ring, full of keys. I'll just unlock this door now, Mr. Pommel said, fumbling with the keys. He tried one in the lock, but it didn't work. Whoops, wrong key, he said. I thought it was a silver one. Gus stood on his toes for a better look. Mr. Pommel's key ring must have had 100 keys on it. This could take all day. He put up his hand. Yes, Gus, Ms. Freckle said. Gus turned around to face her. May I use the restroom, ma'am? He said. The teacher smiled. Gus knew Ms. Freckle absolutely loved it when her students called her ma'am and used may instead of can. Of course, Ms. Freckle said with a big smile. Do you know where it is? Yes, ma'am, Gus said. Mr. Pommel was kind enough to point it out when we arrived. Ms. Freckle looked for a moment like she might pass out with joy. While she was still smiling and beaming all over the place, Gus winked at Hank. Then he stepped away from the line and walked back down the long hallway. The bathroom was on the other side of the front lobby. Gus's sneakers squeaked and chirped as he crossed the marble-tiled floor. On the way, he stopped to look at the bronze statue standing in the middle of the lobby. The statue was of a very tall and very serious-looking woman. Her strong jaw and wide mouth made her seem powerful, like nothing could stop her. "There are hard times ahead," her stance seemed to say, "but I will lead the people of Raven's Pass safely through them to a golden age." In one hand, she held a cane, more like a staff, really. A pair of spectacles dangled from the fingers of her other hand. A velvet rope stopped him from getting too close, but he could read the plaque. It read, "Raven's Pass's first mayor, Catherine Verteidiger." Gus got a last look at the statue's face. Then he turned and headed for the bathrooms. Between the men's room and women's room was an unmarked door. Maybe that's the cellar door, Gus thought. He tried the handle. It was locked. "Can I help you?" a voice said. Gus spun. A woman stood there. She wore glasses and held a long cane in one hand, and she looked identical to the statue. Chapter 5. Meeting the Mayor. Gus stared at the woman. He stuttered. You're... The woman smiled and pulled off her glasses. She slipped them into the chest pocket of her blazer. With her glasses off, she looked even more like the statue. "I am Mayor Kate Vertiger," she said. Then she tapped the tip of her cane on the marble floor. Gus couldn't help staring at the cane. "No," Gus said. "Of course not, ma'am." He turned away. Her stare made him feel cold. A chill ran up his spine and his shoulders shook. "Excuse me," he said. "I better get going. My teacher will be annoyed that I've been gone so long." He started back toward the long hallway where his class was, but Mayor Vertiger called after him. "Didn't you have to use the restroom?" "Oh, yeah," Gus said, feeling silly. He hurried through the lobby, jogging past the mayor. He kept his eyes on the floor the whole time. As Gus passed her, the mayor smiled. "One more thing," she said in her icy voice. Gus cleared his throat. "Yes?" he said, still not looking at her. He kept his eyes on her feet instead. "Stay away from the cellar," the mayor hissed. "Yes, ma'am," Gus said. "And make sure your friends stay away, too," she added. Gus nodded. Then he hurried from the lobby and into the restroom. "See you later," called the mayor. Her voice was like ice in Gus's blood. Chapter 6. The Witch? "Finally," Hank said when Gus joined the class again. Mr. Pommel had finally gotten the meeting hall door open, and the class was shuffling into the room. "Yeah," Gus said. "Took a while." "Did you set something up?" Hank asked. Gus shook his head. His face was still wet because he'd splashed it with water in the bathroom. It was the only way he could calm down. "No," he said, "I didn't." Hank frowned. "What have you been doing then?" he asked. "I can't help you," Gus replied. "You can have the dumb sword back. It's not worth it." "What do you mean?" Hank asked. The two boys stayed in the back of the hall since Ms. Freckle went up to the front with Mr. Pommel. "I mean, I don't want any part of your investigation," Gus said. He watched as Hank pulled out his phone and opened the Battle Knights app again. He poked at the screen a few times. "You have to sign in," Hank said. "Fine," Gus said. He took the phone and started to sign in. Suddenly, though, a bony old hand snatched the phone away. "Aha!" Ms. Freckle said. She held the phone behind her back. Hank's face fell. "Oh, no," he muttered. "I expect this sort of thing from Hank," Ms. Freckle said. "But I'm disappointed in you, Gus. Such a polite young man." She shook her head and clucked her tongue. Then she went back to the front of the hall to stand with Mr. Pommel again. Mr. Pommel was rambling on about the town's history. "Well," Hank said quietly, "I guess we're both in trouble now." Gus nodded. "Might as well investigate then," Hank went on. Gus glared at him. "It's not Ms. Freckle I'm worried about," he said. "It's the mayor." "The mayor?" Hank repeated. "Did you see her?" "Yeah, in the lobby," Gus said. "I think maybe she's the witch." He hadn't even realized it till he said it out loud, but it made sense. That was why the mayor had freaked him out so much. She wasn't just the first mayor's descendant. She was the first mayor. She was the witch.